The sun sets over the fictional landscape of Lunacia, painting the sky in hues of violet and gold. It is a world of peace, where players breed digital creatures called Axies, battle in turn-based strategy, and earn cryptocurrency for their victories. It was a paradise built on code, a utopia where the barrier to entry was a few dollars and a smartphone. But beneath the glittering surface of this digital fairy tale, a rot had begun to fester. A rot that would not be discovered until the walls came crashing down. In the early hours of March 23, 2022, the silence of the blockchain was shattered. A single transaction, invisible to the naked eye, rippled through the Ethereum network. It was not a trade. It was not a transfer of gifts between friends. It was a heist of such colossal scale that it dwarfed every other digital robbery in history. $625 million. Gone. Vanished into the ether, siphoned by a ghost that no law enforcement agency could touch. A ghost wearing the uniform of a nation-state. A ghost that turned a global gaming phenomenon into the largest financial crime in the history of the Internet. To understand the magnitude of this catastrophe, we must first step back into the world that Axie Infinity created. Before the fall, the game was not just a pastime, it was a revolution. Born in the Philippines, a nation grappling with economic instability, Axie Infinity promised a lifeline. It was the first play-to-earn model to truly take off. Families could sit together, strategize, and earn enough SLP, the in-game currency, to pay for groceries, electricity, and school fees. The developers, Sky Mavis, a Vietnamese startup, had built a bridge between the virtual and the real. The Axie creatures, adorable, pixelated monsters with unique genetic traits, became the currency of a new economy. The value of the ecosystem grew exponentially. The token, AXS, and the utility token, SLP, soared. The community was massive, numbering in the millions. They were not just players, they were investors, believers, and victims all at once. They had poured their life savings into a digital dream, trusting that the smart contracts governing the game were immutable, unbreakable, and safe. They believed that the code was law. They believed that if you built a fortress on the blockchain, it could never be breached. But they were wrong. They were playing a game where the house was not just rigged, the house was occupied by a foreign power. The story of how this fortress fell begins not in the server rooms of Sky Mavis, but in the shadows of the Korean peninsula. North Korea, a nation under crushing international sanctions, had long been desperate for foreign currency. Their traditional avenues for hard currency, arms sales, cyber espionage, and state-sponsored theft, were their primary lifelines. But in 2022, they needed more than just espionage, they needed a massive, immediate influx of capital to sustain their nuclear program and their regime. They turned their eyes to the most vulnerable target they could find, a gaming platform with billions of dollars in liquidity and a security infrastructure that was woefully inadequate. The group behind this operation was Lazarus Group, a notorious cyber warfare unit directly linked to the North Korean government. They were not random hackers, they were state-sponsored soldiers, operating with the patience of a sniper and the ruthlessness of a hit squad. For months, they watched. They studied the flow of transactions. They analyzed the smart contracts. They waited for the perfect moment to strike. They did not need to break the front door down, they simply needed to find a key that the developers had left in the lock. The breach itself was a masterclass in patience and precision. In March 2022, the Lazarus Group executed a coordinated attack that exploited a vulnerability in the Ronin sidechain, the blockchain specifically built to handle the high volume of Axie transactions. The Ronin sidechain was designed to be faster and cheaper than the main Ethereum network, but in its quest for speed, the security architecture had been compromised. The attackers had infiltrated the development environment of Sky Mavis. They had planted malware on the machines of the developers. They had stolen the private keys used to sign transactions on the sidechain. With these keys, they gained total administrative control over the bridge that connected the game's internal economy to the outside world. They didn't just hack a wallet, they became the administrators of the bank. In a series of transactions that looked like legitimate transfers to the untrained eye, they drained the bridge. They moved billions of dollars worth of Ethereum, wrapped Bitcoin, and USDC into their own wallets. The speed of the drain was terrifying. It happened in minutes. The game's treasury, holding funds meant for the ecosystem, was emptied. The developers, unaware of what was happening until the funds were gone, watched in horror as the balance sheet went to zero. The technical mechanics of the exploit were a stark lesson in the fragility of centralized control within a decentralized world. The Ronin sidechain relied on a set of validators to secure the network. These validators were supposed to be independent entities, ensuring that no single party could manipulate the system. However, Sky Mavis had allowed the developers themselves to control the validator nodes. This was a critical architectural flaw. By centralizing the control of the validators within their own internal network, they created a single point of failure. When the Lazarus Group compromised the development environment, they didn't need to break the cryptographic encryption of the blockchain, they simply needed to convince the validators to sign off on fraudulent transactions. They had the keys to the validator nodes. They signed the transactions themselves. The blockchain, which is designed to trust the consensus of the network, saw the signatures from the validators and accepted the transfers as valid. The code executed exactly as it was told. The system did not detect an attack because, to the system, the attack was authorized by the very people who were supposed to be protecting it. It was a betrayal of trust encoded in the logic of the network. The attackers used a sophisticated mix of phishing and supply chain attacks to gain initial access, but the final blow was delivered by the compromised private keys. They moved the stolen funds through a chain of mixers and tumblers, attempting to obscure the trail, but the sheer volume of the theft made it impossible to hide completely. The aftermath was immediate and devastating. When the breach was discovered, the Axie Infinity community went into panic. The value of the AXS token plummeted. The price of SLP, the currency that millions of Filipino families relied on for their daily survival, crashed to near zero. The dream of a digital economy evaporated overnight. Sky Mavis was forced to pause the game entirely. The developers issued a public statement, admitting the scale of the theft and expressing their devastation. They offered to reimburse the players, but the question remained, how do you pay back $625 million? The funds had been moved to wallets controlled by the Lazarus Group. The FBI, the U.S. Department of Justice, and international law enforcement agencies were called in. This was not just a hack, it was a crime against the global financial system. The investigation was intense, involving the tracking of digital footprints across the globe. The trail of the stolen funds led to a series of transactions that were eventually traced back to a cluster of wallets. But the money was gone, or so it seemed. The Lazarus Group had anticipated the response. They had prepared for the chase. They had moved the funds into decentralized exchanges and privacy coins, attempting to wash the money. However, the sheer size of the operation left them exposed. The FBI and Europol began to coordinate, sharing intelligence and tracking the digital breadcrumbs. They identified the specific wallets used by the hackers. They identified the pattern of the laundering. But they knew that catching the perpetrators would be a battle against a state, not just a group of criminals. The North Korean government was not going to hand over their assets. They were not going to extradite their soldiers. The money was effectively lost to the international community, locked away in a digital vault that only the North Korean regime could open. The ripple effects of the Axie Infinity hack extended far beyond the immediate financial loss. It sent a shockwave through the entire cryptocurrency industry. For years, the narrative of crypto had been one of decentralization and security. The blockchain was the ultimate vault. The Axie hack shattered that illusion. It proved that even the most popular and heavily funded projects could be brought down by a single point of failure. It forced a re-evaluation of how sidechains and bridges were built. The industry began to look at the concept of validator decentralization with a critical eye. Projects that relied on a small number of validators, or those controlled by the development team, were suddenly seen as high risk. The incident also highlighted the growing threat of state-sponsored cyber warfare. The Lazarus Group was no longer just stealing from banks, they were stealing from the future of the Internet. The hack demonstrated that the borders of the digital world were just as porous as the physical world. The North Korean regime had successfully weaponized the gaming industry. They had turned a game of monsters into a tool of geopolitical aggression. The psychological impact on the players was profound. The families in the Philippines who had relied on the game for their livelihoods were left in despair. The trust in the crypto ecosystem was fractured. Investors became wary. The market reacted with volatility, fearing that any project could be next. The Axie Infinity hack became a case study in cybersecurity courses, a warning of what happens when innovation outpaces security. It was a stark reminder that in the digital age, the most dangerous enemy is not the code itself, but the human element that manages it. The lessons learned from the Axie Infinity disaster are critical for anyone navigating the modern digital landscape. First and foremost, the myth of absolute security must be dispelled. No system is unhackable. The reliance on smart contracts as an absolute guarantee of safety is a dangerous fallacy. If the keys to the contract are compromised, the contract is no longer a fortress, it is a door left wide open. The incident underscored the necessity of decentralized validation. If a system relies on a small group of validators, it is inherently vulnerable to a single point of failure. True security requires a distributed network where no single entity, not even the developers, holds the power to manipulate the system. Second, the importance of operational security cannot be overstated. The compromise of the development environment was the entry point. This highlights the need for rigorous security protocols, including air-gapped systems, multi-signature requirements for administrative access, and constant vigilance against supply chain attacks. Third, the Axie hack serves as a grim reminder of the intersection between cybercrime and geopolitics. The line between a criminal group and a state-sponsored unit is increasingly blurred. The tools used to steal millions in crypto are the same tools used to disrupt national infrastructure. The industry must recognize that the threats they face are not just from lone wolves, but from well-funded, state-backed actors with long-term strategic goals. Finally, the incident forced a re-evaluation of the play-to-earn model. While the concept has merit, it creates a dependency on a digital asset that can be manipulated. The fragility of the economy meant that a single hack could destroy the livelihoods of millions. The future of digital economies must be built on resilience, not just growth. As we stand on the precipice of a new era in digital finance, the shadow of the Axie Infinity hack looms large. It was a moment that changed everything, a turning point where the illusion of safety was stripped away, leaving only the raw reality of vulnerability. The $625 million were never recovered. The Lazarus Group remains at large, protected by a regime that values its secrets above all else. The game was eventually restored, the economy rebuilt, but the scar remains. The trust that was broken is difficult to mend. But the story does not end here. The methods used by the Lazarus Group are evolving, becoming more sophisticated, more dangerous. The next target is not a game. It is not a sidechain. It is the very infrastructure that powers our global financial system. The question is not if they will strike again, but when. And when they do, the cost may be far higher than a single game's treasury. The battle for the soul of the blockchain is just beginning. The hunt for the truth never stops. The shadows are getting longer, and the threats are getting closer. In our next investigation, we will peel back the layers of a different kind of digital nightmare, a story where the line between reality and fiction blurs even further. We will uncover the secrets of the dark web marketplace that was once the most dangerous place on the internet, a place where the sale of human lives was as common as buying a cup of coffee. The story of the Axie Infinity hack was a warning, but the story we are about to tell is a nightmare. Stay with us, and prepare to have your reality challenged. The CipherTrace investigation continues.